Lieutenant Vilixpran is pregnant again. Ducat tells Sisko, O'Brien, Odo, and Worf picks or it didn't happen. And Chief O'Brien makes the worst Klingon ever. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Seventh Rule with Cirroc Lofton.
Hello, hello.
We are joined today by a very special guest, Mr. James L. Conway.
Hello, hello.
Today we are reviewing Deep Space Nine's Season 5, Episode 1, Apocalypse Rising, written by, of course, Ira Steven Behr and Robert Hewitt Wolf, directed by, what do you know, Mr. James L. Conway. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So good to see you after all these years. We just talked about it. It's been close to 30 years. It's definitely been 25 years.
Yes, 25 years.
25 years since we've last worked together. I can remember right away when Ryan was telling me that you would be on the show. The first thing I remembered was how much of a gentleman you are and how classy you were as a director. So let me just give you your flowers and your appreciation for leaving a good impression.
That's good. Nice to hear. It meant a lot to me. I loved Star Trek. I was there from season 1 of Next Generation, and I was there all the way to the very end of Enterprise. I would come and go over the years because of other projects, but to have been part of the very first season and the very last season of the whole Enterprise was a really exciting thing for me.
You know, since you mentioned it, I was looking at some of this stuff recently, and I didn't know this, or I hadn't remembered this, but yeah, you directed Broken Bow. So you set off Enterprise on its mission, and I know it's not 100% relevant to Deep Space Nine, but that was something I was super excited about because, of course, that also featured Klingons, and it had what was his name? Tiny Lister, right? The guy that plays Debo on Friday, who is the Klingon in that episode.
Oh, yeah? No, really?
We had a big Klingon set, and then I didn't remember how many Klingons we had in Apocalypse Rising. When I watched it last week, I was blown away by how many Klingons. But I did remember that from the makeup department was like round the clock because it took so long to get those people in makeup. They couldn't stay the 12 or 14 hours. They had to have 2 shifts of makeup artists. And it was like 20 hours a day of makeup artists working because they had 4 hours to put it on, 2 hours to take it off, and then, 30 of them. It was remarkable.
That's one of the first things that I was looking at it. I put that in my notes. I was like, that is a ton of Klingon extras. Did they actually, go by and kind of ask you for any thoughts or approval on the Klingon makeup, or were there just way too many where you were just like, I trust you, you guys handle the Klingons, you do your thing?
Generally, they knew what they were doing and they delivered them to us. They were looking the way they should. Mm-hmm. But Rick hated when you could see makeup. So the camera department and the operators were very cognizant of how the makeup looked. And if there was anything wrong, they would stop and have to fix it because Rick would make you reshoot it. That particularly became a problem for Renee because Renee's makeup, as Odo, tended to have problems around the lips. In fact, when I saw the recap at the beginning of Apocalypse Rising, you could see that there was a lot of chappedness around his lips, which I know Rick used to hate. In the beginning of our episode, the makeup was good again.
Interesting. Cirroc, I'm sorry I jumped on you. I thought you were going to say something.
No, that's just a little nugget of knowledge. I just didn't realize that he had that pet peeve about makeup and forcing the reshoot. So that meant that you want to get it right the first time because you definitely don't want to have to, go back in the lab and do it again.
Yes, it was a big thing for Rick. And yes, you had to make sure it was right. And because he would make you reshoot it, depending on how severe it was. But he would get angry, not just at the makeup department, because once it's out of their hands and you're on set, it's really the camera people and the director who have to keep an eye on it and make sure that it's looking good. So everybody was very aware of it. And so when you've got that many Klingons running around, let me tell you, there's a lot to look at and a lot to be careful about.
That's a lot. So I can imagine that you didn't do too many of the heavy Klingon scenes early in the morning because it would take time for them to get that many people on the set at 6 a.m. or 7 a.m.
Right. They would schedule the day so that you needed the least amount in the beginning, and then it would grow during the day for the big scenes by the afternoon. But when we had to have that many of our stars, I mean, if all of our principals had to be in the Klingon makeup when we were on the ship or on the planet. So it was the actors were getting there at probably 4 a.m., 3:30, 4 a.m. For makeup.
Yeah.
And Dorn, of course, was like, welcome to my world, guys.
Yeah, exactly. I do this every day. One of the things that first came to my mind when I was watching this episode was Avery's thoughts that I've heard him say on multiple occasions about his worst experience on Deep Space Nine, and he always brings up having to wear this Klingon.
Was it the teeth?
It was the whole thing. He hated having the makeup, the process, the hair. He didn't like sitting in the makeup chair that long. And I just wanted to ask you if that frustration was something that he voiced, or was it present, or was it just something that he kind of kept to himself?
He never complained. So it was one of those things that he was a total pro and he kept it to himself. And then afterwards, he said, God, I hated that.
Okay.
You know what I was thinking?
During the whole process, great.
I was thinking, like, it looked like he honed and harnessed that frustration and used it as his character, because he really came off as an ornery Klingon, which worked so beautifully. And so I'm wondering if maybe he was just sitting in that makeup chair saying, as soon as they say action, I'm letting it out. I'm going to make it happen.
Well, it was funny having to modulate the tone of the performance as Klingons. And in fact, there's the scene about it where Worf is correcting them as they're not being strong enough or being too strong. But I had to do that for years on these different actors, because the Klingon had to be at a certain level, and usually had to bring actors up to that level.
Yeah.
But all the different aliens each had their own sort of world that they lived in. The Kardashians and the Romulans, and everybody had their own thing that you had to sort of keep track of. But the most fun were always the Klingons.
Yeah. And it's funny because, Ryan, in your opening, you mentioned how O'Brien makes the worst Klingon.
I was laughing before I even said it. I could barely get it out.
Yeah, because he's so comical, because it's almost hard for him to bring himself up to that level that you're talking about, where he has to be aggressive and in your face. He's the apologetic guy. I'm sorry, I'll do better. Like, no, that's not the approach.
No.
But did you at some point, Jamie, did you at some point address each actor, each of these four, which is, by the way, the scene is beautifully lit, but we could talk more about that later. But the four actors, did you have to address them slightly differently? Like, give any kind of notes, say, can you bring it up a little bit, like that? Or was it more of just kind of a collective thing where they all kind of knew their roles and you were just focused on directing the whole of the scene?
We rehearsed it ahead of time. And they were they'd been around enough Klingons, so they knew where they had to go. So I didn't really have to modulate them very much. It's usually the other actors, that guest stars, that would need it. So no, they slipped into their roles very well. And it was more about just making sure that we got the scene shot properly and gave them enough room to do another take or two if they needed it. So no, they were great. They worked together a lot too. They would go and rehearse together, so they came prepared.
Awesome. Yeah. Hey, Cirroc, I know we were talking about this, I think a week or two ago. But also, by the way, guys, shout out to our friend Miss Melissa Longo, who's got a new line of awesome shirts. This is a Guess Who, Captain Picard one. Check her out, Walking Art, made by Melissa.com. We'll be seeing her later on the Free For All. But we were talking about the episodes, the Deep Space Nine episodes that you have directed, James, and what the heck? They gave you all the best episodes. Either that or you made all of the episodes the best.
I had some great scripts, let me tell you. Yeah, I did.
Duet, Which
Duet was one of my favorites. It was an amazing episode. And what was interesting about makeup is the guest star, I'm blanking on his name.
Right. The guy that played the Cardassian. I can't remember his name right now.
He had trouble because of the makeup. He had to be there at 4. And during the day, he was having trouble remembering some of the lines. And so we were having to feed him the lines. But he was such a good actor that you never knew that. And so when it was all cut together, it was that wonderful performance. And I love the fact that you could have such a dark episode of a Star Trek show, because neither Voyager nor TNG were ever that dark. So it was really fun to be able to go dark on Deep Space Nine.
His name was Harris Yulin.
Thank you. Harris Yulin. Wonderful guy. Wonderful actor.
Yeah. And that was, and if I remember correctly, Cirroc, I mean, certainly in the first season, that was the highlight of the first season, I believe.
I think so. Yeah, the performance in that was excellent. That was Kira's standout episode, and just they brought up such this really thought-provoking concept of who's on the right side and who's on the wrong side of something. Are the similarities that two people have, even though they're completely opposite and they're fighting against each other, they actually have a lot in common. I thought that was just a great mental chess game between the two of them. Very well done.
Yeah. It was interesting to direct too, because I had so many scenes in the jail cell.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
Big scenes, and I attacked them all differently. So each one is they're blocked differently, shot differently, so that the sense of variety could be brought in. And it was one of those episodes that, because of having to line feed some of Harris's lines, I didn't know what we had until it was all cut together. In fact, he wanted to change the ending. He wanted his character to survive, and made a big argument about it. And we brought it to Rick and to Brandon. I think Brandon wrote it, and Michael was still involved in. And they said no, and Harris was fine at that point. But he really was fighting to the death for his character not to die.
I think we understand why they made the decision to kill the character. I think that was, in a way, that was kind of the point of the episode. It was kind of an important, moment. And if you take that away, maybe Harris is thinking, well, then I can come back for the next few seasons, But yeah, I personally, I could see why they said no to that. And I do think, and Cirroc, back me up on this or tell me I'm wrong, but I believe that our good friend, Mr. Aron Eisenberg, said this was his favorite episode of the first season as well. He really loved Duet, and he was just blown away. And I remember before we reviewed it, he's like, dude, you guys, we gotta, I can't wait for the Duet review. I can't wait for the Duet review. You guys are going to love it. And it was just amazing. It was beautiful. It's really a masterpiece, Jamie.
Thank you. Everybody did a great job.
And to add to that, I think one of our comments when we watched that was how fabulous the acting was, right? The performance. And you would have never known that those lines were pieced together as you just described, because you would have never known it, because it looked like he was delivering one of the greatest guest star performances we've had. And you would know that that it was chopped up in such a way. I just think that's just remarkable.
It's a tribute to what a good actor he was, because he was able to stay in character through that, and he wasn't embarrassed by what was happening, because there was a reason for it. I mean, this man who spent his life on stage doing 2 and 3 hours at a time. So it's not that his inability to remember lines; it was just the sheer exhaustion of having to be in makeup for so long, both sides of a 12-hour day. So everybody understood, and because he was so good, he was able to continue and keep his performance.
No, I've been there when that has happened before with actors, and it doesn't always come out looking like it was not done like that. Sometimes when you feed actors the lines, it looks like it doesn't come across as their best performance, and it looks a little choppy. Right. But in this particular case, I mean, it was just like, it looked like an excellent heads up. And you talked about having to film in such a small space and create something visually for the audience, so that it wasn't stale and just stagnant. So you approached it differently each time, and lined up shots separately, so it wasn't all in one take.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you, so this is the extreme opposite in this particular episode, because now you have the station, the ships, and also the Klingon, this hall of warriors. So tell me about the approach that you take when you have more to work with.
Well, this I look forward to because it was such a big spectacle. I think it was the most Klingons that they ever had at once in Star Trek, ever, before or after. I can't imagine they've had this many since. I haven't seen all of the Discovery episodes, but the ones I've seen haven't had. They did a lot of Klingons, obviously, but I'm not sure they had this many. But it was the challenge, of course, of having our stars in makeup as Klingons and the fun of that. And then the big battle scenes. I love battle scenes. I love action scenes. I did Way of the Warrior when we introduced Michael coming back to the show, and that was a 2-hour spectacle with a bunch of battle scenes. And I really enjoyed having the when you're fighting the Klingons, it's the most fun because of the way they fight and the weapons that they use and with the words that they say. It's always so poetic. That it just makes it fun. And the lighting, you mentioned the lighting. The lighting was beautiful throughout that episode, and there's so much top light where you see these great shadows falling, and that's all. Chris Crossgrove was the key operator, and can't believe I'm blanking on the DP. Jonathan Frakes, or Jonathan
West, West.
The rest of the DP, who's wonderful. In fact, that team was so good that when I did Charmed a few years later, and Star Trek was done, I brought them over, and they were on Charmed with me for 5 years.
Really?
Oh wow.
Yep.
Wow. Now,
I did. I just wanted to just highlight that. Yes, I did enjoy the lighting and love the mystery of it. I felt like I was really in that space. It was kind of like being at a dive bar or something, a Klingon. So I enjoyed that, and the wine, the statue, and the closeness of the characters getting all up in each other's face. But one thing that I think that was really stood out to me in this episode was we had just seen prior to this Odo go from being a changeling to a human. And now in this very next episode, he's going from being a human to a Klingon.
Identity crisis, wow, poor guy.
Like this is a lot for this guy to go through in just such a short time.
Yes.
So I just love the way that was portrayed in the episode. I thought he did a good job, as well as playing the awkwardness of him not really feeling comfortable in the role.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think also this may have been an 8-day episode. Most of the episodes were 7-day episodes, and because this was the first one of the season, and because of all the makeup situations, I think this was one of the ones that got 8 days. Now, of course, everything is at least 8 days, sometimes 9, 10, 11. But in those days, that extra day really made a difference. It really helped you be able to shoot bigger scenes, more coverage, take more time than when you're cramming 7-day shows.
Now, Cirroc and I have both touched on the lighting a little bit, but I was hoping to hear a little bit more about it. I mean, it definitely stands out what you and the team did with the lighting and with the sets and all that. Can you walk us through what your thought process was? Was there something specifically you were trying to go for? Or did you just say, hey, we've got years of seeing Klingon stuff. I know what the Klingons look like. Let's just expand on that, or maybe there was some kind of new element you wanted to bring in, or like there were the statues and things like that. Was there anything you were trying to convey in particular?
That set design was done before I got there, because I was just coming in it's not like doing a pilot where the director is involved in all of those decisions. Mm-hmm. This was something that the production designer worked out with Ira and Rick for what that look was, and then the style of lighting for the Klingons had been established, and I think that Jonathan just took advantage of the big set. The top lighting is always traditional to have with those, and the colored lights. Mm-hmm. But it was a lot of fun for them because it was such a big scene and so many days of it that they got to pre-light it and to test it and see what it's going to all look like ahead of time. And that's why it looks so good. Is they had enough time to shoot in that set to be able to pre-light it and do all sorts of different tests to check out the colors and see which work best.
Just sounds so fun. It just sounds like it just seems like
it was fun.
It must be a dream for like production designers and art department people to just have a day like this, especially if it's the first. And this I'm guessing on, but I would guess that the first episode of a season, you have a little bit more time to prepare for it, you know, and that's why, you know, a lot of times they're a bigger budget one is because they can kind of afford to, you know, not only do they need to make it look big and huge and it's kind of a bigger splash, but also they have a little bit of extra leeway time to kind of plan it out. And it seems like a production designer's eyes would get really big when they see the script and they say, "Ooh, all right, it's time to have some fun."
And the, you know, the spaceship, the Cardassian ship that took them there was also a great set. That one really had a lot of top lighting, a lot of shadows and darks and light and bright. I love that. That was a great set too. One of my favorite spaceships.
Yeah, I remember that too. I just can't, you know, I just know that there's a lot of really big actors in this particular episode with Ducat, who likes to upstage everybody, and you have and you have JG who comes in there. You have Galron, who's like, his eyes are tremendous in this. I like, yeah, I just couldn't.
And your house,
and your house, it's just all eyes, and I'm like, wow, this guy's eyes are, you know, like just telling the whole story.
I love the fact that these guys each played 3, 4, 5 different aliens on the show over the course of this years, and you never know it because of the makeup. But they were such good actors, and they could deliver every time. You know, a lot of people you put in that makeup, and it just closed them right down, and they weren't able to act through it. And these guys, of course, were masters at it. And it's, you know, most of them were Shakespearean trained, and that's for playing aliens on Star Trek. Shakespearean training really comes in handy, because otherwise, most actors who've never done that feel self-conscious about having to be that big, but still be convincing. It's very hard to do that because you're sort of out of your comfort zone. But these guys who have played Shakespearean roles, which aren't big by nature, fit right in.
That's a great
100%.
point. Yeah, because it's funny because Cirroc, you and I were always hearing about, it seems like almost every one of these actors, especially like the alien types, the ones that have to play larger than life, they're all Shakespearean. They're, you know, that's usually their bread and butter. And then it's usually, I think a lot of it is not just because they have to act big, but like a physicality too. Like they have to, their body needs to move in a big way. And Jamie, you also mentioned, you know, and we're all kind of talking about it, I feel like it's also just in the eyes. As long as the eyes aren't covered, then you at least untied the actor's hands a little bit there to just really throw something at you with their eyes. Like Rene Aubergenois was always great at that, very expressive with his eyes. Armin, great with that as well.
Well, you know, actors are acting with other actors, and the eyes are key. I mean, it's very hard to act well by yourself. So you really have to, in a performance, you're performing somebody else, and it's all right here. And when the best actors are really connecting, and they're looking at you, and you're feeling what they're saying, and you get, as an actor, you get sucked right into it, and it becomes a scene, not two people repeating lines, and it's a big difference. So the better trained, the more an actor can actually disappear into that role and into that scene, the better the scene becomes.
Yeah, and I think that you touched on the bigness of it. There's so much expression that has to go along with Shakespeare, because it's complex, and you need to be able to simplify it for the viewer. So I think that once you become gifted at this level of translation, then you can translate, you know, anything and make it understandable and big and loud, you know, for the purpose of the viewer.
And they're also
definitely
they're very directable too. They're used to it. So if you want to crescendo at something and you tell them, why don't we build up to this, they'll be able to do that, or then drop off from here. They're very good at doing that. These guys are great. They were really fun.
So we've got to jump into our break in just a second here. But Jamie, I've got a question that I've been dying to ask you, and I'm going to ask it after the break.
I did too, actually.
We've
got
got like 10. I feel like
I've got two that I really need answered that I want to talk about. So, and Ryan, I know you do too, but I have a few that just interest me about, your career and the things that you've done. So I want to get into more of it.
Great.
Yeah. And so far, Jamie, this has been an absolute pleasure, by the way. It feels like we're in like TV class. We're just like learning a master class from a master, so this has been great so far. Thank you so much for joining us. Everybody at home, we are going to take a super quick break, and we'll be right back on the 7th rule.